Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Person You Want to Be. I am your host, Eric Teplitz. Last year, I marked the end of the first full season of this podcast with a special season finale episode. In that episode, I featured clips from each interview I had done over the course of the year. The clips were organized into specific categories based on patterns I observed about what my guests reported were crucial aspects of their becoming who they most wanted to be. I have included a link to that episode, episode 18, the season 1 finale, in the show notes for this one, which can be found in the written description of this episode on both the audio platforms and on YouTube. This year, I have gone back and reviewed all the interviews I did for season 2. Once again, I have assembled clips from each one and arranged them into specific categories, somewhat different ones from last year, but that each reveal ways you might determine what it is you want to do or who it is you want to be, at least next, if not for the rest of your life. The 5 categories this year are as follows. Number 1, listening to your life for clues. Number 2, reading books or otherwise taking in good quality inputs. Number 3, eliciting or accepting help from outside sources. Number 4, using difficulties, challenges, or setbacks to propel yourself forward. And category number 5, random other things. I hope you enjoy this final episode of 2023 and season 2 of the podcast. Let's jump right into category number 1, listening to your life for clues. We begin with Cory Muscara. Listen to Cory describe the moment as a college student he realized he needed to completely change the path he had been on up to that point.
Halfway through my college career, I was kind of going down a business finance track and met with this New York City hedge fund manager at the New York Stock Exchange. And I remember very vividly him giving a talk. And at the end of it, I was like almost dissociated. I was out of my body. I felt like my soul was sucked out of my body. And I was just like, I don't know what I want to do with my life, but I definitely do not want to end up like that. And that began more of this existential inquiry of like, what is actually worth putting my energy into? And that led me into this quarter life crisis at age 19, 20, of just like, what is this all about? And it kept being reduced to the very trite response of happiness. Trite in the sense of like, we hear that all the time. Everyone wants to be happy, but profound in the sense of like, I think if you do reduce all of our aims to one thing, we're all motivated in some way, shape, or form toward this idea of well-being, fulfillment, happiness. And so it was just clear to me, like, if that's the key thing, then I should probably figure out what that is sooner than later. And then try to reverse engineer my life around that. Of course, there were a lot of good structural setups for me to pursue that. You know, when you're in college, you can kind of like endlessly explore different ideas. You have had a bunch of college loans, which definitely made an issue with the full pursuit of that exploration. But there was a period in my time, and I got lucky at that time in my life where there was an opportunity to explore that. And my parents were also supportive of that inquiry. And so, the world of entrepreneurship, of business, of like creativity, of wanting to help, and then this deep inquiry into what makes life worth living all coincided. And kind of like then the next decade is the intersection of all of that.
Cory's inquiries into happiness, well-being, and fulfillment led him to a wide variety of trainings, studies, and experiential learnings that inform the teachings and offerings he now delivers to a growing following of students today as a teacher of mindfulness and meditation. We'll hear more from Cory Muscara at the very end of this episode. Speaking of meditation, a subject that came up in many of this season's episodes, we hear now from psychotherapist and grief educator Mitch Davidowitz, who has also been a meditator and mindfulness practitioner for the past 50 years. Listen to Mitch give examples of how different events in his life seemed to, in combination, point him in the direction of what would become his life's work.
This roommate who introduced me to meditation, I had actually been taking classes with him at a junior college in South Florida. And I was interested in this girl, this woman, young woman, in the same row of a class of psychology. And this guy sat between us. And he was in the way, obviously, and kept trying to get to know me. What I didn't realize is that he was going to be the doorway to what was to be who I later became, what I got involved with. And so absolutely, it was a fortuitous moment that we were placed in that row, in that class. And I don't think it was any accident at all. While sitting on that month retreat in California, I had a spontaneous image of thousands of monks to the left, right, behind me. And there was some sense of knowing that I belonged in that practice. Not for any religious reasons, but that was going to be my path. And so absolutely, that was a pivotal moment. I came to understand grief and loss through living it. And I think unless you've had a significant person die or grieved the loss of a pet or a relationship and know what mourning feels and looks like, you might not know it. But again, at 20, I understood about, through the meditation, allowing what was there to be there. And that became how I held space with others, by helping them to allow what was there to be present. So in 81, first semester of training, my mother died of lung cancer, had never smoked. I learned of it, I learned of it on Thanksgiving, and 4 months later, she was gone, the age of 63. So this was another, and a good word, pivotal, in that I had no intention of pursuing grief work. Even though I shared that work, I was training to be a marital and family therapist. But I was so shocked by the response to my grief, the absence of understanding. I remember going into a colleague's office, or I should say a professor's office, and he said, "How are you doing?" I said, "Not too good, still grieving." And he said, "How long has it been?" And I said, 6 months. He said, "You should be getting over that by now." And I understood that he didn't understand. And I wound up doing my master's thesis on things people say to those in loss. And so that got published in 84, but I started to explore that, took a semester off from college to grieve this fairly sudden and traumatic loss in my life at 26. And then in 84, I became the bereavement coordinator of a hospice, and then started to teach and work around that. And also in 80, the beginning of my training, I would start to get clients who had lost someone. So again, all of this was shaped by things that happened that were calling to me.
Wow. I love how Mitch described there a series of seemingly unrelated experiences with meditation, with personal loss, and with a particular professor's response to him, and how each of these things played a role in his becoming a person who, for over 4 decades now, has helped many others sit with, process, and honor their own experiences with grief and loss. The next category of ways you might determine what it is you want to do or who it is you want to be, as shared by my guests on the podcast this year, category number 2 is reading books, or otherwise taking in good quality inputs. The first clip in this category comes from my interview with the person Tim Ferriss famously declared just might be the real-life most interesting man in the world, Kevin Kelly. Kevin has done a wide variety of things in his life. To name just a few, he's traveled the world and documented via photographs the disappearing cultures of Asia, co-founded Wired magazine, and written best-selling books about the future of technology. In this clip, Kevin shares how reading gave him a massive aha moment as a young man that signaled to him what he most needed to do to embark on his own hero's journey. Here's Kevin Kelly.
After I dropped out of college, I decided I rented a house in Rhode Island on the beach during the winter. And I decided I was going to read. I was going to read the great books. I was using Mortimer Adler's book about how to read a book. And I was going to go through the classics and read as much as I could for like a year, whatever it was. I forget how much money I had just to pay rent. And I was sharing with some other guys who were students at URI. And so I was reading a book, almost an average of a book a day, because that's all I was doing. I'd get up in the morning, I would read, and then I would eat oatmeal, and then I'd, read until I went to bed, and then I'd read again. And I was reading the high books and the low books. And one of the books that I read towards the spring was Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. And I was reading, and I was just, something was igniting in me. And there was this sort of like him going around the country in this ode to the marvelous energy and diversity of people's occupations and the people who's talking to, and this sort of, ode to the grandest I am multitudes, and it was just, and my gaskets blew, and I said, I have to travel. I have to travel.
So it was Walt Whitman's fault.
It was Walt Whitman's. Just inspired to something. I have to see. And because I had never been out of New England, I mean, it was like I'd never seen anything. I'd never been on vacation. It was like I have to see something. And at that very moment, my friend, who was my best friend from high school, was studying Chinese to become a missionary. He was in Taiwan. And he wrote me a letter, says, "Why don't you come visit me while I'm still here?" And I thought I could go photograph Taiwan, and I have no clue at all about what was in store. So it took me 6 months. I stopped reading. Then I had to get a job. It took me 6 months to save enough money to buy an airline ticket and have some money to go to Taiwan. And that was just the beginning of the thing, because when I stepped off that plane, I mean, it was like going to another galaxy. It was just it just blew my mind. It was just so different. And that was like, okay, this is my education. This is my university. This is what I wanted to do. This is how I'm going to learn every single day, encountering something that was new and different and weird, and trying to learn Chinese. And it was like, yes, and I traveled for a decade and awarded myself an honorary degree in Asian studies at the end. So
An interesting side note, Kevin began what was to be a decade of his life dominated by travel adventures in Taiwan. Upon returning to the US some years later, he met his wife of now 36 years, who just happens to be from Taiwan. Next up, we have Derek Sivers. Derek was a full-time musician in his 20s. A simple desire to sell his own CD over the internet in 1997 led him to becoming, inadvertently, a massively successful entrepreneur when the website he started, CD Baby, took off and became the world's largest online seller of independent music. When Derek sold the company that was the sole focus of his life for a decade, he found himself lost about what to do next. Like Kevin Kelly, he buried himself in books. And this is what happened.
I think that's what I really did in 2008 when I sold CD Baby. I spent about a year just reading books and just feeling a little lost. Like, what now? Like, I thought my gravestone would say, he made CD Baby 50 years ago and really not much sense. Here he lies. So I spent about a year feeling lost until one day I just bolted up in my chair full of inspiration that I wanted to be a TED speaker. I wanted to be a writer, speaker, thinker kind of guy, like the kind that the TED conference invites. And that mission filled me with intention and action. It made me instantly full of adrenaline, lay out an action plan for how I would do such a thing, how I would become a writer, speaker, thinker guy that the TED conference would invite to speak. And just seeing how much adrenaline and action it filled me with, I felt, okay, this is the right thing for me to do now. That was the indicator that I was on the right path, because a good goal is one that makes you take action. Goals don't shape the future. Goals can only shape the present moment. A good goal is one that makes you take good actions in the present moment. And if it doesn't do that, then it's not a good goal, no matter how quote unquote inspiring it may be. If it's not making you leap into action in the present moment, it's not a good goal. So this one did. This goal helped me take action. So then I was, officially out of my funk and on to the next thing.
Beautiful. And I can imagine someone listening to this and hearing that and going, maybe they're in that phase of stuckness and feeling lost and just having no clue and no motivation or desire or obvious point of direction. You go, how can I get that moment that Derek's talking about, that epiphany where suddenly you are inspired? I would love to hear what you have to say about that.
It can come from anywhere. Inputs. Take in good quality inputs, whether it's from books or YouTube or podcasts or whatever it may be, good quality inputs. For me, it's reading. I love reading nonfiction educational books. And that specific one, it was in a history book. In fact, I think it might have been Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, maybe even Art of Seduction, where he goes into historical examples of uses of power. And I believe it was when he was talking about Benjamin Disraeli, who I think is an old prime minister of England, but started from nothing, didn't come from a noble family. And it said how he made a name for himself by always stepping into the spotlight and always courting attention. And at the time, I was feeling like the opposite. I was feeling like I had too much responsibility and too much attention with CD Baby. I want to lay low. I want to legally change my name. I think I'll just be an open source programmer. I'll move to Europe, change my name to Wendell. Nobody will know who I am. I'll be anonymous. I'll just get into open source programming and live off my savings. That was my plan that wasn't super inspiring and making me take action. It was just like, yeah, I guess that's what I should do. And then I read this one thing where just a quick mention of Benjamin Disraeli, and I went, oh, or I could lean into the spotlight. I was like, yeah, it means making myself more of a target for ridicule and attack. But on the upside, when you make yourself a public figure, you meet a lot of interesting people. And I like meeting interesting people. I like having interesting conversations with smart people. So yeah, I think I'm actually going to lean into this and aim to be a little more public, or a lot more public than I've been. So that was a deliberate decision in 2009. And that's why I started applying to speak at the TED conference. And then they said yes. And then I spoke at their 3 in a row in 1 year in 2009 and 10, and courted a lot of attention. And it was good. And then here I am on a podcast like this where you're asking me all kinds of questions. And, the reason I do these is because of the people that I meet that hear them. So I'm not doing this to sell books. I'm doing this because you who's listening, whoever you are, wherever you are, ideally will go email me afterwards. And then I get to meet these really cool, interesting people because I'm here doing a podcast. So that was a very deliberate decision while reading 48 Laws of Power and reading one sentence about Benjamin Disraeli and going, oh my God, yes, this is what I need to do.
Good quality inputs. It is my hope, of course, that this podcast might serve as just such a thing to someone out there listening or watching. For the last clip in this category, we turn to Ann Metz. Ann Metz was a professional counselor who was going through a difficult time in her personal life. On a long road trip, she listened to Michael Pollan's book about psychedelics called How to Change Your Mind. Listen to her account of how this book planted a seed that not only changed her mind, but changed the course of her life.
While I was on this road trip, my life was sort of falling apart. And, my partner of 6 years, had sort of dropped a bomb on me that he had relapsed. He had been in recovery for about 10 to 15 years and had started using again and had gotten into some professional trouble as a result of that. And this really came as a shock to me. I kind of had no idea. I mean, I knew something was up. I knew that I was really unhappy in the relationship and had gotten very depressed, but I didn't know what was really going on. And so, I found this out and sort of realized that, what I thought my life was like and the direction and the trajectory it was taking, it was not quite that way. So I was on this road trip. I was by myself doing some soul searching and listening to this book, and met someone on the coast of Oregon who had a surfboard and a mustache, and he had some psilocybin mushrooms. And so I got some from him and took them and tried to be as, from what I learned in the book, as therapeutic as I could, or at least as intentional as I could. And, I was falling asleep later that night, like well after the medication, after the drugs had worn off. And I heard this voice, and it was my own voice, but it was in my head. And it said, you can change your life. You don't have to wait for life to pick you. You can do this. You can choose what you want. And I obviously had mentioned before that, the great expectation for my family was, of course, that I would be someone's lovely wife, and that I think was the example of this sense that I had to wait, that I was waiting for life to choose me. I was waiting for a husband to choose me. I was waiting for my employer to choose me, that I was sort of sitting there and just hoping that somebody would notice me and hoping that my life would unfold the way I wanted to. And it had never really dawned on me that I could do it any differently. And so as straightforward as that might sound to some folks listening, what, of course you can choose, dummy. It hadn't really occurred to me in a real way that I actually could kind of pick my life and live it in the way that I wanted. And so that was just this important message that I got. And, over the course of 8 months, working with the therapist and trying to figure out how that message could be integrated into my life and how I could execute it. Eventually I did. I got out of this relationship. I sold my home. I moved out west, and, I really started over again, kind of with the understanding that, like, anything that I want in life, I can choose it, that I'm really responsible for making these choices, and sort of waiting around for everybody to select me and make things happen is just never, ever going to pan out. It was like one of the most profound experiences of my life. And yeah, I had done a lot of therapy over the years, done a lot of meditation, been very involved in, other sorts of self-help and improvement things. And I just really think that that psilocybin sort of unlocked something inside of me, which was this inner healing wisdom, this kind of inner wisdom that I have. And I think that was what was profound. It wasn't like it was this idea that was from outside of me. It was really me being able to kind of listen to my truest intuition. And that something about that substance allowed me to access it and allowed me to listen and take it seriously.
Anne now has a private practice as a psychedelic psychotherapist, wherein she helps clients prepare for and integrate their own experiences with psychedelics for the purpose of achieving psychological and spiritual growth. If you decide to explore taking psychedelics yourself, I would encourage you to do so in an informed manner, and ideally with the supervision and guidance of a trustworthy professional in the field. This is a great segue into category number 3, eliciting or accepting help from others. We begin this category with a clip from my conversation with Gordon Marino. Gordon is the only human being I know of who has been at the same time both a philosophy professor and a boxing coach. Gordon was a troubled young man who managed to turn his life around dramatically, in large part by accepting help from some key people when he needed it. He mentions one such person here in this clip.
As a kid, I looked up to mafia guys. I thought they were cool and tough. And I followed that childish thinking into even when I went to Columbia. I was a really disturbed kid, but one ability I had was if someone of intelligence and good heart reached out to me, I was able to take their hand, which a lot of kids don't have. So all this talk about mental health, if you don't have trust, it's some of the kids I work with in boxing, they can't even look you in the eye. They just don't have that trust. I had enough trust to grab the hand of someone who was willing to help me. Beatrice Beebe, she's a famous, the most famous people in the world on infant-mother interaction. But she was like 26 when I went to see her, and I was 19. I did have enough sensibility when I went to Columbia and saw that it was freaking crazy to just go to the counseling center, perchance. So I had some self-awareness there. What heals is, and Freud recognized this, was relationships, transference, that connection. And so I would see her 3 times a week, and she's just always there and stuck with me. And I've tried to be there for that. So that was a lesson for me in terms of my relationship with students and athletes, to just be there, always be there. And so that was more than just psychotherapy for me. It was a lesson on what kind of person to be.
Powerful words from Gordon Marino that ring true to me. What heals is relationships, connections. Sometimes in life, we need other people to reflect back to us what it is we really want, or to give us the encouragement we need to help us go for it. Listen next to Aleksandra Vančevska, creator and host of the Being and Doing podcast, describe how a friend helped her recognize and pursue her podcasting dream.
I felt like I really want to do this to be able to connect, because I am curious about people's stories. And so I was then realizing, well, I can probably create that platform somehow. And then for a long time, I wanted to do it with my ex-partner. And then somehow I realized that was not his wish. And I was kind of stopping myself from doing it because he didn't want to do it.
Huh.
Then it's like when I came to London, like London was a liberation. I gave myself the permission is the word you used. I cut my hair. I mean, now it's short, like I had it like all the way to my butt, basically. And so I cut my hair. I give myself permission to do things I never thought I would do in my life. Like I never thought I would do them there. And so the podcast was always on my mind. So I got the mic. I've listened to Tim Ferriss's stuff, but I didn't know how to call it. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any idea. And so a friend of mine, Amy, who is an incredible artist, actually, we met in a London flat, and it was Corona time, and she was basically, I adore her because and this is where people are so important, because she, you know, when you're starting an idea, it's quite fragile.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like a seed that you need to protect for some time, until you kind of feel ready. And she was the first one. I got that. She was the first one. She interviewed me. That interview is not out, maybe one day, but she interviewed me. I interviewed her. She actually brought a lot of the good questions. So some of the questions are actually from her. It started as we are going to interview each other as we are successful, because why do you need to wait to be someone who has money and fame to actually be able to share your story? And then we also talked about success as fashion, as, you know, what's fashionable today in success might not be fashionable at some other time. And then we like after that happened, we had a brief the next day, and I was like, oh, we need to do this together. And then we kind of we thought, and she named it. So the Being and Doing is coming from her. It's actually coming from our conversation, and this is how many of my programs are formed. I speak to people that listen well, and they reflect back to me in one sentence, what is it that I want to do? And Being and Doing was what she reflected back to me. And it was like, I just remember it was such a wonderful day. There was sun, and like, you know, we were being talking how to be and do at the same time. And so that's how it started. And then she was like the next day she came to me and she said, Alex, actually, this is your dream. Like, I think, and I love her for that, because she knows her boundaries, and she didn't get pulled into something that was my projection, my dream, and it was truly my dream. And so I took it off, and I started interviewing people as soon, and that's something, it's really interesting about me. I have this thing, it's cooking, and once it precipitates, I skyrocket, because I know exactly what I want to do. But I learned how to allow the cooking to happen long enough until I have the feeling that's it. That's what I was looking for this whole time. And it's just like, it's almost like, and then it's there.
Alex's podcast, Being and Doing, actually produced its own offshoot, which Alex calls Being Human and Doing Psychotherapy, as Alex herself is a therapist in training, in addition to being a scientist by profession and a podcast host. Clementine Moss moved to New York City after college with the intention of becoming a writer, working as a waitress and bartender to support herself, but not getting much traction with her writing. In this clip, Clem describes how a couple of pivotal people helped her move toward realizing a new artistic dream at the age of 27.
It's like the afternoon at the diner was on the corner of Broadway and Bleecker in New York City. And, there were people in the restaurant, and there was a man sitting at the bar who owned a recording studio on the Lower East Side. And he was sitting there, and I had been goofing around with the drums, but it just occurred to me to just say in the moment, like, I'm learning to play the drums. Right? Which up until then, I hadn't put a lot of stock in what I was doing. And I'm learning to play the drums. And he said, really? And he took out a card and he wrote a number on it. And he said, this is the number of the best drum teacher in New York City. And he held out the card. And I just remember taking that card, because that was Fred Klatz, my teacher, who really, like, from the first drum lesson, I just thought, this is what I want to do. This is really what I want to do. So
that was your superhero origin story moment, as I like to call them.
Well, there was that funny thing that happened where, so I had this friend who was a psychic. She was a real jet set psychic, right? She was reading for Madonna, and, it was like this, she was this kind of big deal psychic. And I went to see her when I was 26, and she said, right before I turned 27. And she said, so you're going into this 3-year period we call the Saturn return, which is the astrological thing where, like, everybody kind of shifts, right, in their life. And it's kind of a difficult time where things will fall away from you don't need. She said, so just, you stand in danger of having a lot of interests, but never actually committing to anything. And which was a great thing for me to hear at that time, because that was completely me. And she said, just pick one thing, and do that thing every day for 3 years. See where it takes you. Yeah, see where it takes you.
That was the advice that you got?
That's the advice I got. And then the
pick
drums.
One thing and do it every day for 3 years. That is genius.
Genius, right?
But to follow it is a whole other thing, right?
Yeah. Well, she said, she scared me. She said, I read for people who have always been the wife of the guy. She was talking about Mrs. Man Ray. She said, Mrs. Man Ray is an artist unto herself, but she's known as Mrs. Man Ray, right? And she said, this is a danger in your life, that this could happen to you. And so, if you want to be what an artist in your own right, then you need to commit to something. Just pick one thing. And I think shortly after that, and again, time is weird in my brain, but shortly after that was the drum lesson. And I thought, this is the thing, like, I'm just going to do this. And I really did for 3 years say, what the heck am I doing? Every time. My first drum, I think a year and a half after I took that lesson, I had my first show. I joined this little band and I had my first show. And I remember walking around the block just going, what am I doing? Like, this is so weird that I'm playing drums, that I'm being a musician. But what she said can't kind of,
After playing drums professionally in a couple of other bands, Clementine founded an all-female Led Zeppelin tribute band, Zepparella, which she has now been performing with for nearly 20 years. Our next clip features Kent Weishaus, whose story of becoming the person he wanted to be really combines all three of the categories we've covered thus far. In listening to his life for clues, category number 1, Kent had been harboring a growing unease about his career in television production, feeling like he wanted to do something that contributed in a more positive way to society. He then read a book, category number 2, that had a profound impact on him. The book was Becoming Attached by Robert Carlin. This book gave Kent some insights into what was behind some of the dysfunctional personalities he encountered in the TV business. When he made the decision to go back to school to embark on a brand new career in his 50s, he accepted the help of his wife, Amy, accepting help being category number 3, who took over as breadwinner of the household while he navigated the training and requirements of his master's degree in social work. Here's Kent with his before and after story of career fulfillment.
I worked on tabloid shows where I had to show up at work at 4:30 or 5 in the morning to get a show on the air by 1:30 or 2 in the afternoon. And you're driven by caffeine, and you're having, by and large, a kind of a good time slapping these stories together and getting them up on the air. And the adrenaline rush feels good. To identify with that program feels good. But if you slow down your thinking and you say, wait, what is the end result of the product I'm producing? It's false expectations about celebrities and events. You know, tabloid television came about in the mid to late 90s. And now it's been adopted by news stations worldwide. It's like you don't get the news anymore. You get tabloid. And it's like, so in retrospect, I really regret that part of it. The TV business, at least in my experience, there were plenty of instances of people who were demeaning and abusive. In fact, I don't want to go into great details, but I had one experience which was a life-changing thing where I was severely psychologically abused, and it caused me to change direction and leave what may have been a career in sitcom production and direction and go more towards talk shows and tabloids. And so you see people behaving this way. They're not self-regulated, and they're happy to dump it on you. So I had a story I was telling myself that I wanted to be a therapist. Okay. My father was a psychiatrist back in the day. The psychiatrists were actually psychotherapists. He was an analyst. Another psychiatrist friend of mine describes that as being a therapist with a prescription pad. That's what my father was. My mother was a therapist. And so I thought, well, I think I can do this. And that was the story I was telling myself. I knew very little about it.
I'm interested in hearing about what your experience was as a returning student in your 50s. Can you speak to that? Yeah.
Well, that was actually a really good part of it. I wasn't sure what the heck was going to happen. I thought, well, I'm going to do this. It's funny. I was working for E-Entertainment the last couple of years on these specials that would come up, and when I was accepted to Cal State LA, they said, okay, there's 2 undergrad courses you have to take to be able to get into the master's program. Assuming you pass these courses, we're going to accept you next fall. And so one of them was biology of aging, and the other was social psychology. That's right, social psychology and biology of aging. Incredibly stimulating. So I'm going to these courses at night while I'm working at E-Entertainment during the day, supervising edits of these, put your eyeballs on this type thing. So I thought, okay, if this is what the work is like, I'm going to love it. And the next fall, I jumped in. And Eric, for me, I don't know if others would have this experience, but for me, it was like everything I hoped for. I couldn't soak enough of this information in. I got straight A's, and I loved it. I loved going back to school, so I loved it. And upon graduation, I was offered or I applied for the job in the psych hospital I'd been working at as an intern, and as soon as I got my associate's license, I was hired there, and went right to work. I've never I have no regrets going into this career.
The truth is, none of us becomes the person we want to be in a bubble, in a vacuum. We are interdependent beings, and we need each other to navigate our lives and become successful in any arena. Next is category number 4, using difficulties, challenges, or setbacks to propel yourself forward. We begin this category with David Hale Sylvester, also known as Big Dave. Big Dave lost a dear friend of his in the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center in 2001. In his grief, Dave decided that he would use this tragedy as a catalyst to pursue a long-standing dream in honor of his friend's memory.
I wanted to do something. The more people talked at his memorial service about the specialness of Kevin, and it wasn't just empty platitudes like, oh, he was a great guy, whatever, that stuff that you hear at a lot of funerals where it's just like, oh, they're the greatest guy in the world. There was a story behind it. The more that people talked, the more I was like, I want to do something significant for this guy. And it was always, I always wanted to ride my bicycle across the United States. It was something I always wanted to do. But, you know, the question was, when was the right time? When was the right time? When was the, you know, any other time that I had said I wanted to ride my bicycle across the United States, people are like, what are you going to do about work? What are you going to do? It's going to cost a lot of money. It's this and that and other. There are always a million and one questions. And, you know, it's funny, the questions, no one ever says don't do it. They just ask a million questions, which you just interpret as don't do it. And then I said, I think I'm going to ride my bicycle across the United States. And someone said, will that be cool? And then someone else said, can you do it? And I was like, you know, and I remember I was like, oh, wait a minute. No one's saying no. Like, no one's asking the questions that are normal no's. Like, wait, you know, I was like, yeah, I can do this. And so what's interesting is that I forgot all about it, you know, and then a couple months later, somebody said, man, I think it's cool that you're riding your bike across the United States. And I was like, wait, what? And I was like, oh shit, I did say that. And so I got to work on it. And so I joined a bicycle tour to bike across the United States from Astoria, Oregon to New Hampshire. And then from New Hampshire to Philadelphia, I rode by myself. One friend came up with me and we bicycled the last, you know, few hundred miles, whatever it was. And it was a life-changing thing, not because of the cycling. It was because of the people, the warmth of the country. You know, for anybody that's older in your audience, you know, that time right after September 11th, I mean, Americans were united. Americans were, you know, were open. Americans were, it wasn't as much about, you know, white, black, Republican, you know, Democrat. It was just, hey, we're Americans, you know, and it was a special time where people were kind of cool with each other, you know, not perfect, but kind of cool. And it was an open to ideas. And so it was, as I bicycled across the United States and was talking to people, there was I never had a problem at all with anybody. If anything, people wanted to talk to me more, to either talk about Kevin, talk about, you know, they had never been to New York before. I remember a woman in Wyoming talking about, you know, she wanted me to explain how big the towers were because the biggest building she had ever seen in her life was 7 stories, which is the biggest building in the whole state of Wyoming.
Wow.
Yeah. And 2 levels of that is parking, you know, so it's just, you know, I found myself being this conduit to people's feelings about September 11th, people's expressions of grief, people's expressions of friendship. I just found myself being this emotional conduit for people. And so, and the closer I got to the end, people weren't saying things like, "Oh my God, I bet you'll be glad when you're done." People were saying, "Well, what are you going to do next? What are you going to do next?" And so, I mean, it was beautiful because, like I said, everyone's saying, "Yeah, what's next?" It was very, very cool because it was almost as if the world was giving me permission to see more and be more.
That bike ride across the United States, it turns out, was just the beginning for Big Dave. He has since cycled across Africa, Asia, and Australia as well, and given himself the mission of adding smiles and happiness wherever he goes. Hugs and high fives have become his trademark, and he has personally given out hugs to over 500,000 people in 50 states and 42 countries to date. Next, we hear from Mark Hentemann. At a young age, Mark landed his dream job when he was hired by CBS to be a writer for The Late Show with David Letterman. But just as good fortune had smiled upon him in an instant, so too was his dream taken away from him. Listen to Mark tell the tale, as well as share what he decided to do with the painful hand life had dealt him.
But yeah, I was working my ass off. I could outwork anybody. And I liked it. I enjoy the grind. I enjoy going after stuff. And that's part of the fun of life. But yeah, I come in that day and just within like 5 minutes, like, hey, thanks, but we're making changes and you're out. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. And so I got myself, I thanked them, thank you for giving me this amazing opportunity. And I got my backpack and walked out the door, and I was just like, whoa, like what am I gonna do? What am I gonna tell? Like my, part of it was like, what am I gonna tell my family and my friends? They made such a big deal out of it. Like when Mark Henneman got hired on Letterman, and I was like, no way. That's impossible. How is that happen?
Right.
And I'm like, oh my God, like what happened? Like it's almost better. It would have been better if I never got hired to like now have to go back with my tail between my legs. Like, and what am I going to do? And it's just devastating, and I walked out onto Broadway, left the Ed Sullivan Theater. And, typically I would take a bus or a subway. But I just started walking just in this daze. And just felt terrible. Like, I'm a pretty optimistic guy in general. And I had that sort of experience of like knowing that mindset is an important thing. But I was just like, I was lost and just devastated. And walking, I'm like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I remember drifting from my body and looking down on myself like this pathetic guy walking down, Broadway in morning rush hour, I think it still was, amongst the throngs of people. And I just hated it. And I felt like shit. And finally I kind of looked down on myself as this pathetic thing. And I'm like, fuck that. I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? Whatever it takes, I'm going to get better than every writer in that room. And maybe the prelude to that was like, I didn't deserve this. This came too easy for me. And I'm not in the league of these other writers that were in there. And it's failure. You're confronted, punched in the face with like this rejection and failure. And, I was pissed. Eventually, like that was something I latched onto. Instead of being wallowing in my sort of patheticness, I got pissed. I'm like, fuck that. I believe 1,000% that you make your own success, like that you make your own talent, that I believed I could get better than every writer in that room, because I saw their work ethic. Like I saw everyone's work ethic in that room, and I knew that I could work twice as hard as what they were doing. Like they were complacent. The guys who had been there for a long time, they left. It
was a cushy gig for them.
It was a cushy gig, and they weren't pushing their creative, chops. And I would do that. And I'm like, I'll focus. I can focus. I've always been able to focus, and I'll lock in and I'll understand comedy. Like there was a lot I didn't know. I knew how to write cartoons. I know how to draw cartoons, and I got good at that because I spent 6 to 8 years doing that. And I, writing top 10 lists was a little bit of a different muscle, and some of those things were different muscles. And obviously, like writing scripts was another muscle that I had to learn. But I always believed 1,000% you could learn it. I can learn it. I'll deconstruct it. That's what's going to be my burning thing, is I'm going to get better than every one of those writers in that like Emmy loaded writer's room. And that's going to be my shining goal. And I, marched home. I'm like, that's what I'm doing.
Wow.
And, next morning I was up at 6 a.m., and deconstructing every joke, every story, every plot turn, every character. I wanted to go deep, very, very deep, and understand why it was good when it was good and why it was bad when it was bad. It ignited me immediately, and that was exciting. I was like, this is how I'm going to embrace this. This is going to be my challenge.
Mark ended up moving out to LA and got hired to write for a brand new sitcom at the time called Family Guy. He has written for that show for the entirety of its 20 plus years on the air, as well as become an executive producer on it. He is a 2-time Emmy Award nominee. Lastly, in this category, we hear from Pat Wetzel. Pat has experienced a number of trials and tribulations over the years. But listen to her story of how a painful divorce set the stage for a whole new experience of life and of herself.
The thing that impacted me was that we'd moved several times with my ex-husband's job. So I didn't have any sort of community around me. I didn't have my feet down anywhere. And I found myself in a place I never wanted to be, I never wanted to live, and I didn't like. So,
check.
check, yeah. I mean, family gone, all those connections gone, illness still there. It was just like, it would just turn my world upside down. And actually, I went on a cross-country trip to visit some friends. So I went down to San Francisco for a while, and I rented a white Mustang convertible. And I drove up to wine country. And so I went to Calistoga, which was at best known for its mud baths. It was kind of a sleepy little town. And there was an airport with a runway that intersected the main street in town. It's a little odd. At any rate, I went up to to a building. They say glider rides. And I thought, oh, what the heck, I'll go do that. And I went for a ride, and it didn't really wow me one way or the other. I mean, it was neat. The vineyards look really cool from above, but we landed and I went about my way. And fast forward a little bit, back in Pennsylvania, which is where I was living at the time, I heard about a group of lawyers that flew gliders on weekends. So I called up and invited myself out for a 3-day weekend, and I flew for 3 days. And I was hooked. That changed my life. Sailplanes are pure magic. They have massive, massive white, well, as you get to higher performance planes, these beautiful white fiberglass wings. I mean, they're 50, 60 meters wide. I mean,
Yeah.
this is incredible. They are highly engineered airplanes that can travel hundreds of miles without an engine.
You had sent me links to some videos to give me a sense of these breathtaking views, and just imagining what it must be like being up in the air by yourself in one of these sailplanes with no motor, no engine, and you're just depending upon the aerodynamics afforded you by your environment and your ability to skillfully kind of navigate. And there was a line in your book, I'm going to find it here, that I think is very appropriate. It is said that flying is the second greatest thrill known to man. Landing is the first. So yeah, this sounds incredibly brave, audacious, and exciting. And this you never would have, I mean, presumably, we don't know, right? But this presumably never would have happened had you not experienced these initial bumps in the road, correct?
Oh, I can't imagine it ever would have happened. And I think too, you have to realize that once you gain a little bit of mastery in a sport like this, it is incredibly addictive. And it's not an adrenaline rush. That's what people think. It's really about skill and competency and accomplishment. And it's really quite incredible. But I think that for me, I was desperately looking to live again. I talk about life wish, death wish as part of my perspective during that period of time. And it's not that I wanted to die. It's just that I wanted to live. And all my sense of adventure in life that had been really experiential adventure that had been instilled in me from the time I was a kid was gone. And soaring just met those needs in spades. And it met my need to kind of get back on my feet and prove that I can do things. I think we all get stuck in different aspects of our story. And one of the ones I've really had to work on, frankly, was my divorce, because it would have been very easy just to be angry over the whole thing, which I was for a while. But now when I look back on it, oh my God, I'm so grateful. It gave me the freedom to do what was right for me. I look back, and while it's kind of ugly, it's okay. It turned out to be kind of pretty too.
The last category of clips, the random other things, is a hodgepodge collection of insights shared by my guests this year on the podcast. They offer more ways for us to think about what kind of person we wish to be or become, whether that's in response to a hand that life has dealt us, tuning in to what is most important to us, or often some combination of both. We begin this last section with Ahava Shira, who had to navigate her love of dancing around a scoliosis condition and eventually a spinal fusion surgery that she underwent as a teenager.
I was so tired of wearing these braces on my body. At least by fusing my spine, I won't have to wear the braces anymore, and that'll be that. That was their way of fixing it, right? That was the cure. So I went into the hospital and spent 10 days. The surgery was 4.5 hours, and they did literally, what they do is they grafted bone from my hip and then put it in between each of those 15 vertebrae. And then they put a steel rod alongside the spine with wires. And then the rod is really only there for the first 6 months while the bone grows. And then it's the bone that does the fusion of this vertebra together.
Fascinating.
There were risks in not doing it, which was because the spine could keep curving, and there was a risk of collapsed lungs, etc. And I already was always dancing. I kept dancing all throughout the time that I wore the braces on my body. I still danced. Don't forget, I was in a Jewish community with lots of bar mitzvahs and lots of sweet 16s. And so there was these glorious, glamorous parties night after night for a year and a half when I was 13, 14, and another year and a half when I was 16, 17, 15, 16, 17. And I danced right through with the braces on. And then they fused my spine, and you would think, how can you dance? How can you do anything with 15 vertebrae fused together? So that's all of my thoracic, the 12 thoracic and the first 3 lumbar fused. And curiously, I started to discover, I kept dancing, and I started to discover all these wonderful practices of dance that were about letting the body be free in its movement, which I had already done. I grew up in the 80s, right? I was dancing on disco squares, at a lot of those parties, right? So I was doing the hustle, the bump, all these kinds of great dances. And I started to discover this conscious dance, inner dance, 5 rhythms dance, authentic movement. So all these alternative forms of movement that drew on the natural inclination in me to move my way. And so I made it possible for me to keep moving exactly as I was, because I just pursued that. I pursued that and learned the connection between the emotional and the body and the movement, and learned the aesthetic and dramatic and the body moving and the poetic. When I started to write poetry and perform poetry, I would move my body as I was performing. I found all these different ways of accessing the movement as my body could do it. I found contact improv, that was another one. So lots of different modalities, all centered around dance movement, where I could be as free as I possibly could, despite the fusion in my spine. Yeah, in some ways it's fascinating, because I didn't necessarily know what my body would allow. In some ways, I was pushing it, or any kind of movement in a sense felt like a process of discovery. I still do it. When I'm moving in my living room or moving on a dance floor somewhere, I don't necessarily know what the body can do because it's fused. So I follow my heart, and I follow this gorgeous impulse to move and feel the pleasure and the rhythm and the life force. It's like boom, boom, the heart, that life force that you named, the more I follow, the more. And then however it unfolds. And sometimes I kind of get a little scared. Really? Can my body do this? Can it do this? But it lets me know if it can't.
Just as it does for anyone, right?
Exactly. I think it was a intuitive and really a naturally authentic mode of expression for me. And I think there's wisdom in it, because keeps as my body as flexible as it can be.
Right. Which I'm guessing is significantly more flexible than a lot of people.
Most people can't tell when they look at me, and they are very surprised. What? You have 15 vertebrae fused together? How is that possible? There's how is it possible? And I feel that way sometimes too. How is it possible? Yeah, it is. It's one of those paradoxes, life paradoxes, right? Pleasure and pain, and limitation and liberation.
Limitation and liberation, indeed. Speaking of liberation, Alex Sanfilippo worked a full-time corporate job for many years, but he knew in his heart that the person he really wanted to be was an entrepreneur. In this clip, Alex shares how he made the transition from full-time employee to full-time entrepreneur.
These were all side hustles I was doing on the side. You mentioned coaching earlier. I did a little bit of coaching because I was like, okay, I know a lot about building structures, and I can help a company to streamline process. I wasn't a good coach because I got so invested. I wanted to jump ship and always be like, oh, cool, I'll just help you for free and we'll get it to where it needs to be. I'm a helper at my core. I'm not made to be a coach. I had trouble with that boundary. And so that was a failed side hustle, right? And I did that for a little bit, and I now do a little bit of it now that I've grown up a little bit, right? But I decided to do a web design agency. I was like, I'm good at this. I knew how to build websites. So I did that. It takes one bad client to ruin that experience for you. And I was out, right? So like I tried that. I tried building a paid online community. I tried paid content, all kinds of things. And it was just failed after failed after failed after failed. But the thing is, what I learned from that is I was able to take each of the experiences with me. And I now have that as like additional knowledge outside of the corporate job. And again, I'm so thankful I had that foundation and have these side hustles going along the way. And I tried all kinds of things and just couldn't find it. And finally, Eric, I got this genius idea to start a podcast. And here's why I started a podcast. Because I decided if I can't figure out how to leave a 9-to-5 job, I'm going to talk to people that have figured it out and learn what they did. And I'm just going to share it. Might as well let the world hear it, because there's a podcast. They're not going to charge me for it. And there you go. And simply, that's
it gave
what
you
it
an
was.
excuse to pick the brains of people who had done what you wanted to do.
Yep. And then not be like, cool, that'll be $1,000. Now I'm just like, it's an exchange. Give me your time. I'll blast it out on social media for you. And
this was the birth of Creating a Brand.
Correct. Yep. That was the name of the show. I couldn't come up with a fancy name. So I'm like, I'm going to call it Creating a Brand because it's about creating a brand. And the name did well. Anyway, worked out. But so two things happened during this time. I learned how to become an entrepreneur, but I also learned that I wanted it to be in podcasting because, man, as soon as I got into podcasting, I met people like you, Eric, and I got to hear incredible stories. And I'm like, man, I want to be in on this industry. I love this. So finally, a side hustle that ended up working was I again started the podcast. And I'll be real. I'm so thankful that Creating a Brand, my old show, did very well. So it got me on podcasting stages. And at this point, one of the side hustles I was doing was speaking. So I was traveling around speaking at events and stuff like that. And I liked it. And at one conference I was at, Orlando, Florida, it was 2020 before things shut down. And there was about 2,000 people at this conference. When I got off stage, I just asked everyone who talked to me, they're all podcasters, what they were struggling with. And I heard a lot of things, but 100 people, I was writing it down, said the same thing. We're having trouble finding ideal guests for our show. And I just knew it. To become an entrepreneur, what I learned over doing Creating a Brand was you find an area of passion that you have, you find a problem they have, and you create a solution for that problem. And so I was like, here's my community, podcasting. The problem is they can't find guests. The solution is Podmatch, which, for lack of a better term, it works just like a dating app. Instead of connecting people for dates, it connects people for podcast interviews. So that was the solution that we ended up building. And that's what got me into full-time entrepreneurship. Coming back to it, I should say, right? That's what got me there.
Some of my own guests on this podcast have come through using Alex's creation, podmatch.com. Robert Greenberg is best known for his engaging teaching style, as showcased in the music courses he created for the teaching company, later rebranded as The Great Courses, and more recently, Wondrium. A composer himself, Dr. Bob shares here his philosophy about what makes for both great music writing and great teaching.
When I used to teach composition, I used to tell my composition students, who are very involved in writing all this modern stuff, which is fine, but don't ask an audience to sit through anything that you wouldn't want to sit through yourself. Write music that you yourself would listen to semi-recreationally. Don't torture anyone because you're taking their time. And that's the one thing no one has enough of. That was what I call the Bobocratic oath. And that is, do no harm in medicine. For me, as a composition teacher and as a composer, waste no one's time. Music is storytelling. In fact, pretty much everything we do, I'm convinced, is storytelling. Our species has existed for a couple of 100,000 years, and we've been writing for the last 5,000 years. So the great bulk of human history, the way information was transferred was via stories, which were myths and analogs and metaphors for the lives that were being led, and the individuals involved would identify with the stories to the degree that they resonated with their own lives. We're storytelling creatures. We're faced with chaos in this world, and stories are about finding order in the chaos. I've always liked a good story. I came from a family of joke tellers. My grandmother was an actress. It's all storytelling. And writing a piece of music is storytelling. Teaching is storytelling. And a good story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has an exposition. First, you start with the characters and a situation, And then it's got a development where those characters interact to some degree, and time passes. It's got a recapitulation where the characters emerge, changed. Well, I've just described a very important musical form called sonata form.
Yeah.
Right. So it's all storytelling. And the more I learn, the more interesting the story gets. Of course, the more you realize you don't know. And that's good too, because you're constantly seeking out more information, but trying to contextualize it. And that's the thing. Information without context is meaningless. The small without the large is meaningless. I've been lucky in that I think we've all had, like you just identified, senior year, we've all had enough good teachers, hopefully, that we know how it looks when it's done correctly.
Clearly, the person Robert Greenberg has wanted to be all along, be it in the domain of composition, teaching, or otherwise, is a great storyteller. Check out his great courses, and I believe you will deem him a roaring success in this regard. On the subject of stories and myths as a means of making sense of our lives, we next have Kelly Carlin. Kelly is the only child of legendary comedian George Carlin and his wife, Brenda. Among Kelly's many creative projects of her own, she is the author of an entertaining and insightful memoir entitled A Carlin Home Companion, Growing Up with George. Here, Kelly speaks on the journey of individuation we all must move through on the road to adulthood and becoming the person we want to be.
You know, this is why 12-step programs work so well, because we sit inside these rooms and everyone shares their stuff. And the first thing we realize is, oh my God, that person's telling my story. And they probably have such a different background from you, or, you know, or whatever. You know, we think we're such odd little beings as humans, right? We want to be these special, unique acorns, like we talked about at the beginning. And yet in the end, you know, and this is why there are archetypes and mythological themes, right? I mean, this is because in the end, we're kind of all living the same stories in multiple different ways with different costumes on, but the patterns, they're not that many patterns. And, you know, and this individuation process is very much about this finding ourselves and having to pull our parents off of a pedestal, or if you never put them on a pedestal and they were horribly abusive to you and insane, and it was too much chaos and not a lot of love, to find a way to, you know, see the wounds within them and forgive them on some level. And we have to do both, you know, because I think either way, we either put them on a pedestal or we put them and demonize them, right? And there's this duality we do with them. And realizing that we do that with ourselves too, because if we can't do it with our parents, if we can't forgive them and we can't see them as human, then we'll never be able to forgive ourselves and see ourselves as human. And I think that's the only way we can get through life, is to really take ourselves, both to see that we're not the biggest pieces of shit in the world, and we're not fucking God's gift to the universe also at the same time. And that's why I think I used humor so much, and why I do use humor. And I was just teaching a memoir workshop this weekend about this, that, you know, humor gives you a chance to, if you can laugh at yourself, you're going to be okay. When you're able to laugh at the most stupid shit you've ever done in your life, you know, and I'm not talking about laughing at being a victim to some really horrific situation or person, but as adults, no matter what, we're constantly making choices. And that's why in the book, even though, you know, like that first marriage with Andrew is insane, the shit I fucking signed up for. But in the end, you know, you know, and I felt victimized for a long time when I left that. It took me a long time to get through that, feeling like I had really, you know, sacrificed 10 years of my life and been really conned by this guy and all this kind of stuff. But when I was able to get to the point of like, oh, some part of me made that choice. Some part of me said yes to him, even though it felt like it was not a choice in the moment. When I was able to see that part of me that made that choice and see the wound that led me there, and to forgive that darling 18-year-old who so desperately wanted to be seen and heard and loved by, you know, a man who just decided to put her on the pedestal, and all the, you know, the Kool-Aid I drank from that, you know, when I was able to see that and really go, oh, darling, 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 what, then I felt like, you know, then I could be free of it, in some way. And when you're free of it, then I feel you can really share those stories, because then they really will have universal appeal. You know, if you're only going to play the victim and only going to play the, you know, look how I was conned, and look, you know, look at the you know, I call it the victim, rescue, perpetrator drama triangle, right? If we tell our story in that triangle only, you know, the audience can't enter into it as much. And either can our higher selves, you know, either can we can't enter into our own story. We're stuck in the story constantly. But when we can really step outside of that triangle and see the little, you know, the kind of the myth we're stuck in some ways, I think then we really can be free of it, and really do feel whole again in some ways, or whole for the first time.
Another story of a person coming into her own comes from Charlotte Angeles, who happens to be my very own dental hygienist here in LA. Listen to Charlotte describe the way in which she tapped into qualities she had not previously experienced in herself once she committed fully to working toward a goal she decided was really important to her.
It was just stressful. I think I'd never like really witnessed a small group of people like at their most stressed out in life. But it motivated me because I knew I wanted it, and it motivated me. And also there was like this whole other, well, first of all too, I was like, you know, it wasn't mom and dad putting me through undergrad again. It was like, I am funding myself, and I am an adult, and I'm doing this, and I want to do this, and I want to have a career. Like I wanted to have like a niche career, you know, like not something open-ended. I mean, and there are avenues in dental hygiene that isn't just clinical, but like that's what I wanted to do. And so I pushed myself. I pushed myself more than I'd ever pushed myself with anything. And like to the point that I got Dean's List multiple trimesters, and was like, had never done that before. You know, like back in undergrad, it was like I remember I had to take sculpture, and I hated sculpture class. So I reused the same sculpture for 3 different assignments, and like was not surprised when I got a C, you know, like it just, this was way different. I wanted to like be as good as I could be. And yeah, and it was intense, and it was scary, but it paid off for sure. So
one of the things that struck me when probably like around the time we first met, and because I'm chatty, especially when I'm, I guess, in a dental chair. It's such a curiosity to me, like what possesses someone to go into this. So I'm sure I asked you that. And what I remember being really struck by was you told me that you genuinely enjoyed it, and you explained why. And it, like, I didn't feel like you were putting me on. Like, I was like, how about that? Like, and I was just like, good for you, you know, like, that's great.
Yeah, I do genuinely enjoy it. And like, I love connecting with people. And it's like, it's really a career where you can connect with all kinds of people.
Yeah. You've probably been on like hundreds of podcasts as a result, right? By now?
No, not particularly, but yeah, I mean, like you said, you know, talking a lot in the dental chair, it's like there's so many patients where I'm like, am I cleaning your teeth, or are we just like catching up right now? Because I love talking to them. And it makes the days turn themselves over very fast. And I can tell you, every time I worked an admin job or anything like that, I'm like looking at the clock, like, good God, how slow can this day go?
Yep.
And my days go very fast. And I think there's definitely an element. I mean, of course, I love all the healthcare and the clinical and all those aspects of it, but there's also like,
of course, that's not a of course to me. So what is it then about that is appealing to you?
I mean, it's the science behind dentistry in general is like fascinating to me. You know, especially being in hygiene opened up a world to me that I didn't know about. Like, as a kid, you go to the dentist, you're like, woohoo, I don't have cavities, but I didn't know gum disease, you know, periodontitis, gingivitis, like tooth loss as a result of that. Clenching, grinding, recession, all these things that we're constantly talking about with our patients, you know, orthodontia, not as an aesthetic benefit, but as like an overall health benefit, having your teeth in harmony, like in the right alignment, like how that affects your airway and your breathing and your overall body health, like everything being connected is just fascinating for me. And like, especially the doctors that I work with are like very interested in all of that. And so like learning about all of that from them, like, and how passionate they are about it, it's just like, it helps, it like drives the motivation behind like being at work and like feeling good about it. Like every hour is different. I'm on my feet, I'm sitting down, I'm on my feet again. It's like, I like that. It just helps me. And so I think that it's just like, there's a lot about it I love. And plus, you know, I can make a very decent living and work 3 days a week and then be there for my kids. So there's a lot of pros to it. And I am happy. Like, I can genuinely say I'm happy where I'm at right now.
Next, we have Danny Miranda. Danny started a long-form interview podcast back in September of 2020 at the age of 25. In 3 years' time, he has released over 400 episodes and is still going strong. In the first part of this clip, Danny explains what brought the podcast out of him. And in the second part, he discusses what has kept him going throughout the first 3 years of doing it.
Starting in March of 2020, I said, I'm going to meditate 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening. So I did that for 2 months. And then I was doing 40 minutes a day and I heard about Naval's challenge. So I was like, let me do 60 minutes straight. And I got so deep on myself starting in May of 2020 that I ended up doing it till December of 2020. It was a 60-day challenge, but I just loved it so much that I continued. And it's no surprise that in July of 2020, I have the idea for the podcast. In August of 2020, I start recording episodes. And in September of 2020, I released the first episode. And so that to me speaks to the importance of literally going inward, of analyzing your own thoughts, of just sitting there and being, because it's hard for me to imagine me doing 60 minutes of meditation wasn't going to help me create the actions that were more in alignment with my truth, my purpose, my reason for being here. And it did. And so to me, that was the biggest thing that has helped me become a more in aligned person and help me become the person that I want to be, doing those 60-minute sessions. And I'm so grateful for that time.
In episode 39 of the Danny Miranda podcast, released less than 3 months after the first episode, Danny got to interview one of his longtime heroes, Gary Vaynerchuk. Listen to Danny describe the wisdom that Gary shared at the very end of the interview that validated Danny's own approach and served as inspiration for his continuing journey with his podcast.
I asked him about if he knew Wine Library TV, which was his first YouTube channel, if he knew it was going to be successful. And he said yes. because the learnings from the process were going to be more valuable than any monetary outcome he could get from it. And to me, that was my thesis with starting the podcast. That was what has, like, that thought and that idea and that truth has played true in my own life for the podcast for the past 3 years. It's been ups and downs on it.
Yeah.
You know, like it's been like debt, and then, you know, paying it off, and then debt again, paying it off, and putting all of it back into the podcast because I believe in it, and then, you know, losing belief, and then losing money, and then gaining money. It's been like a roller coaster. But the whole time I have this peace about me and about myself and about what I'm doing of like, oh, there's not even a question. There's nothing else I'd rather do. There's not, like, even if I'm in debt, but like, there's just a knowing. And so thankfully I'm not in debt anymore, but it's just like, I just feel like so at peace, even when I was in debt, of like, there's nothing wrong here. Like, this is right. So
where did that peace come from, especially in the lows in that journey?
One part of it is that I didn't have anyone else to support other than myself. Another part of it is just like understanding that it takes time, and that I was putting in the time, energy, and effort into my craft, and that I was getting better at my craft, and I was investing in myself. And I often would think about, like, okay, a professional basketball player wouldn't expect to be a professional after 3 years of doing basketball. It would likely take him, you know, at least 10 years to be a professional and to play at a professional stage. And so even if you don't take that as the example, maybe it's like a lawyer, like it takes 3 years for them to get their degree. And so after that, then they could start practicing. And it's like only after those 3 or 4 years and passing the bar. So I'm like, I looked at my life like that and looked at podcasting like that. Like, have I really put in enough work to be a professional at this? And I came back to that often when I was going into debt, similar to people would go into debt for school. I was like, I'm paying the price of admission right now of what I'm trying to accomplish. And it feels right because it's in alignment with the person I want to be and in alignment with my calling. So that's kind of why I felt peace around it.
Danny has not only put in the work in producing the quantity of episodes he has, but he has been committed to improving his skills with every aspect of the show, including, and perhaps most especially, his skills as an interviewer. As you may have gleaned from the first segment I just shared from my interview with him, Danny is a true believer in the power of meditation. A number of my guests this year have been as well, so it seems fitting that we bring this season finale episode to a close just as we started it off. Here's another clip from my conversation with mindfulness and meditation teacher Cory Muscara. From studying so many different modalities, neuro-linguistic programming, Ericksonian hypnosis, you did 200-hour hatha yoga training, and many, many other things. What have you learned from studying all those different modalities? Did you notice any significant overlap among them, and were there any like really significant takeaways for you personally from any or all of those? That's a big question, but
Yeah. I think the main thing, it's hard because there's so many of them are different kinds of trainings, and they've all served different functions. Like NLP and hypnosis are good for maybe quicker behavior change or inducing certain emotional states. And then some of the trauma work is good for working with particular wounds or knowing how to hold space. Positive psychology was interesting from an academic lens and understanding the science of happiness. But, you know, the thing that's emerged most in probably the last couple of years has just been a deep respect for the uniqueness of each person's journey and the uniqueness of my own journey. And that, like, yeah, there's so many tools that I can pick up and things that I can bring in, and they're good and they're useful and they make a big difference. But there's also a particular karmic momentum to my life that I often just need to get out of the way. And the deepest practice has just been like letting go, listening to what wants to come through right now, what feels most true, like most spacious, most clear, in a way that I'm not wrestling with it, and then just like surrendering to that. That has been the biggest thing. And if you get a little too caught up in different paradigms and modalities, then you can prematurely try to layer those onto your own experience and like manufacture something that's not actually yours. Like if you think like I need more positive emotion, but you're going through like a dark night of the soul experience that actually needs you to descend more deeply into the pain until it can open and you like kind of just break something in you in the best way possible. Like break like that part that's holding on, that's trying to control, like that usually gets more painful before it gets better. But if you're just like, no, I'm gonna, I gotta wake up and I gotta do my cold plunge, my sauna, and my journaling, and then go into, then it's just like it's coming too much from the head and not actually from the aliveness of what's here. And that's coming from someone who just loves patterns and habits and structure. And so the biggest takeaway for me of doing all of these things has just been, they're great, but the deepest thing is like very much uniquely mine. And I have to be listening to that moment to moment to moment. And maybe that means the deepest skill is that the capacity for that internal listening.
And so we come full circle from listening to your life for clues to listening to yourself. Maybe these are two versions of the same thing. We are here to become ourselves, and perhaps all of our experiences and all of our encounters with each other are meant to facilitate that very thing for you and me as individuals and for all of us collectively. It sounds like a paradox, but in order to become the people we want to be, we must become the people we want to be. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. It has been my pleasure and perhaps my purpose, at least in part, to create this podcast for you. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, please do me a favor and share this and or any other episode with someone you feel would appreciate it. If you are watching on YouTube, I welcome your comments below. If you are listening on an audio platform that allows you to rate and review the podcast, I would really appreciate your doing that. A deep bow of gratitude goes to all of my guests who shared of themselves so willingly, thoughtfully, deeply, and generously. I hope you will check out or perhaps revisit the full episodes of those guests that appealed to you in these clips. Their websites, books, podcasts, and other services and offerings are linked to in the show notes for each of their individual episodes. Another deep bow of gratitude goes to you, listening to or watching this podcast. Your interest and support helps encourage me to become the person I want to be. If you would like to contact me directly, you can do so via the contact page on my website, ericteplitz.com. I would love to hear from you. Also on my website, you can explore my blog and podcast archives, check out my online course, which is called Opening to Greater Possibilities, and even sign up for a complimentary coaching call. May you be and continue to be the person you want to be.